but for the panelists, any of you can start, but let's go ahead and just start by introducing yourself, and then maybe just saying, kind of who you are, and maybe just a little tidbit on your start into medicine. We can kind of start there. I don't know if anybody in particular wants to start or calling someone.
I can go. So my name is Hunter Peterson. I'm originally from St. Cloud, Minnesota, and I ended up getting an MBA and a master's in medical anatomy before coming to medical school. And now I'm a second year at Des Moines University in Des Moines, Iowa.
I can go next. My name is Chris Fungwe. Grew up in Michigan, but I've been in Virginia for quite a while. I kind of took a longer route. I graduated from Old Dominion University in Virginia with a bachelor's in biology. I worked for a little bit, and then I ended up doing a grad program at Eastern Virginia Medical School, where I'm currently at now. And I'm a second-year medical student.
How's it going, everyone? Sorry, I don't know if I just cut somebody off. My name is Assad. I graduated from University of Florida with my undergrad, and my master's I did at University of South Florida. I grew up in Orlando, Florida. I have done 3 semesters of med school. I'm currently taking some time off, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Happy to be here and connect with everybody.
Hi, everyone. My name is Luigi. I had sort of a similar trajectory to Chris. So graduated a little bit ago and got my undergrad degree in biology as well. And then like Chris, worked for a while, decided I wanted to go to med school, did a master's program at Loyola, where I did my undergrad as well in Chicago. And I'm a second year medical student at Kansas City University right now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Frank Boucha. I grew up in Gabon, Central Africa. I'm originally from Cameroon. I went to the University of Maryland, College Park, where I obtained my bachelor's degree in cell and molecular biology. Then I did a postbacc program at the NIH, where I was doing research in immunology, particularly HIV and COVID-19. And right now I'm a first-year medical student at Brown University here in Rhode Island, Providence.
Perfect. I believe that was everyone. So nice introductions. So we got a couple of questions here. I don't know. I'm sorry if you guys can hear that, but let's go ahead and start with the first one. Kind of, if somebody wants to maybe elaborate on kind of what is a postbacc or like a master's program, maybe like why you choose to do one, like why you chose to do one, whether it was postbacc or master's, and maybe like a little bit about what it is for people who don't know.
I could start this off. I think the difference between a postbacc and like a full-on master's program is that, at least the way that it was sort of explained to me, is that postbacc programs are typically more for pre-med students who might not have done all the prerequisites while they were in undergrad, whereas the master's program are typically for like a student like myself, where I was sort of like pre-health in undergrad and didn't really know which direction I wanted to go in at that time. So the reason why I did a master's program was because I did all of those basic prereqs, but wanted to sort of get back into academia just because I've been out of school for a few years, and also just more as like a GPA boost. So that sort of is how I understand the difference between the two.
Yeah, I would agree with everything Luigi said, and just kind of throw in like a master's is pretty much the way I've understood it. It's always going to be a formal degree that you're getting. A postbacc a lot of times can be informal, like you might do it at your program where you're just taking classes for no specific program, but it may just be you trying to either retake / strengthen classes that you've been taking, so that your medical schools can see your most recent science classes that you've taken and things like that.
I guess mine is a little bit different. In terms of like postbacc, I didn't take any classes in my postbacc year, but I still was considered a postbacc at the NIH because the NIH has a lot of like postbac positions that are open and that are very very useful. Actually, I wouldn't say very useful. They are extremely helpful if you're trying to apply to medical school. Based on what I see, most of the people with whom I was at the NIH ended up attaining medical school and even to like very top programs, just because of like the research and the resources that you are able to have and the connections that you can have at these places. So I just come in like with like, now if you have to improve your GPA, yes, maybe do like an academic postbac program or a master's program. But if you feel like you're one of those persons that's also okay with your GPA and you feel like you want to take off a year off, I think applying to one of those programs at the NIH will greatly serve you justice at the end.
Nice, nice. Like all those answers, definitely good feedback. Just a little tidbit, like I'm finishing up mine here in like 2 weeks, so I totally understand. But maybe if anyone wants to touch on this next question, so maybe for someone like deciding, maybe they're coming up on like, you know, their junior, senior year, undergrad, you know, and they're questioning like, hey, should I do one of these? Maybe what would you guys say? Like, how do you decide if one of these is for you, or like, what did you guys do to be able to decide like, yeah, I want to do either postbac or a master's?
So I kind of honestly assessed like where I was after like my junior and senior year. I wanted to make sure if I was going to take time off, which I'm very glad I did, what I was going to do during that time to improve my application the most. And personally, for me, it was my grades. And I know that I still wasn't as confident as academically as I wanted to be. So I felt like that was the best step for me moving forward, was doing a master's program. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's definitely just important to kind of assess your situation. I wasn't so fortunate to have a group like this with mentorship when I was going through undergrad, and I kind of foolishly applied between junior and senior year, just kind of hoping that something would stick, and I didn't get any interviews, wasted a bunch of money, and then I was kind of left scrambling during my senior year, not knowing what I should do, knowing that med school was off the table for the coming years. Like I already knew that that's what I wanted to do, but I kind of shot myself in the foot applying with less than ideal statistics behind me. So for me, the decision was definitely just to increase my GPA, especially my science GPA, and improve on that. But if your grades aren't a problem and it's more like your test scores or your extracurriculars, then these programs probably aren't going to be something that are going to benefit your application. And most of them cost quite a bit of money and you end up going into more debt as well. So I would say that they're best for people that want to improve their grades or even like prove that they can accomplish the rigorous courses that are in these types of programs.
I think going off of what Hunter said, like I 100% agree with that. It's definitely if you really want to improve your GPA, and that's something that I personally wanted to do. Even though I was out of undergrad, I knew like my GPA was like fine. It really was nothing special at all. So I knew that I wanted a little bit more of an academic sort of boost to my application before I ended up applying to medical school. But something else that I really appreciated that I did, and I would recommend everybody else to do, is really be cognizant and intentional when you are researching these programs, if it's something that you decide really might benefit your application. So what I mean by that is I sort of had the luck, if you will, to go to my undergrad university that I ended up going to for my grad program. So I already knew of the reputation of my grad program and sort of the reputation I had in the Midwest, which is where I wanted to stay at the time. And I think it's really important when researching these programs to, one, look at their matriculation rate over the recent like 3 years or so. I think that'll give you a really good indication of if the program is producing students that end up successfully matching into medical school. And then the other thing as well, which my program did really strongly in my opinion, was the advising that master's programs are really able to give you. My program was super, super comprehensive. We had 2 academic advisors. We had over 20 medical schools come and do like lunch and learns with us that like talked about the program. We had students from the year before come and constantly tutor us, give us like different workshops when it came to interview prep and how to study for the MCAT and things like that. So that's another thing that really attracted me to a master's program, especially because I was applying or when I was already out of undergrad. So I just felt like as a student who graduated a few years ago, I needed sort of that extra guidance to help because like all of my friends were already in medical school. So I really didn't have that community to, you know, bounce ideas off of and, you know, see where they sort of were in the process as well.
Nice. I think we can move on to one of the submitted questions. So this one is, let's say I have a 3.5 cumulative GPA and a 3.43 science GPA, and I enroll in an SMP, so a special master's program, and I 4.0 it. Will my undergrad grades, will they still hinder me? Is the question.
I can go ahead and answer that question. So 3.43 science GPA and 3.5 overall. Is that what you said? Yeah. So
yeah.
I would say no. I say this also because again, going through the application, talking to a bunch of people, talking to like, you know, like experts and the application process. I don't think it matters if you can pull up a 4.0 in the Postbacc that already shows that you're academically capable of doing the work. Again, the med school application process is very holistic. It's more of like what you bring to the table. What are the things that are unique about you? And the grades just show them that, hey, if you're able to come to this school, you'll be able to excel in medical school. And I'm also saying this because again, even though my GPA was like very good, but my MCAT was not the best. But where I got interviews at, people were surprised. But again, it's just because of what I was bringing to the table. Because I came in with a very like research heavy background, and I was interested in a specific type of infection. And I demonstrated by doing like a longitudinal research from college. And again, that just painted the applicant that I was. So I don't think with those stats, those are fine. If MCAT is okay, and then you know the rest of the application tells a specific story about you, you're going to like catch the eye of at least like one school. So it's all about what you really bring to the table.
Yeah. To follow up with Frank, I think I'd agree. I think with those stats, you don't necessarily have to run to decide to do an SMP. I think kind of as you were saying, you would want to just really self-evaluate, talking with mentors and seeing, because if you have a strong MCAT, if you have strong extracurriculars, if you can write a strong story, and then also where you're applying to, those things can be enough for you to get in. There are people who are getting into medical school with similar stats. So I think it would just be about assessing yourself and figuring out where you think you stand.
And I also think it's just important to, if there is a big gap between them, obviously, hopefully a positive gap or positive upward trend, just explaining it or having like reflecting, because in interviews I was asked about my undergrad grades, and I think it was just about reflecting about how much I've grown since then and how I've adjusted and how I've improved. So as long as you have a story as well, showing that you grew and you reflected, it's I don't think it's a big hindering factor.
Nice, thank you. Just
one more thing to add. Yeah, I completely agree with everything that everyone has said. But to tag off of what Luigi mentioned earlier, make sure you do your research on these programs if that's what you're going to do, because some programs are just going to be easier, and it might be like really easy to get that 4.0 GPA, but it might not really hold a whole lot of weight on your application if it was a program that kind of has a reputation for just churning out good grades just to look good on an application. And that there are programs like that out there. So just be mindful when you're looking into different programs at different schools.
And sorry, I actually, Hunter, that reminded me of something else I wanted to mention as well that I forgot. But something while you're doing your research on these programs is that a lot of like special master's programs specifically will offer a linkage program to the medical school. So that is absolutely huge. And you really, really want to do your research when it comes to what this actual linkage is. So a few examples is something I consider like a relatively good linkage is like my program that I did. So if you got above, I believe it was at the time like a 3.6 in the program and like a 509 MCAT, and I believe the stats are still pretty similar, you had an automatic guaranteed interview to Stritch. And I mean, that is huge, especially because Stritch is sort of like a high yield school. So they get like over, 10,000 applications every year. So that's sort of a guarantee to get your foot in the door. Other programs, like like I mentioned, Kansas City University, and they have a master's program. I would not recommend that master's program. The matriculation rates aren't super great, and they're actually sort of, they don't really advertise them. You have to sort of ask for them. So that I would say is a big red flag if you're not able to find that information readily. And also too, this master's program caps the amount of students from the master's program that can be offered a spot in either interview or a placement in their M1 class. So that creates just a lot of competition in the class. And also the advising isn't necessarily great as well when it comes to that linkage. So really do your research. Just because a school has a linkage doesn't necessarily mean that you will have a big chance to benefit from it. So I would really, really pay attention in how that linkage works. And if you feel like you can meet the qualifications necessary to get that linkage, if that's what you're looking for.
I
Perfect.
was going to add, sorry about that. Just quickly, I think there's something that I maybe didn't emphasize when I was answering that question that CJ asked about the post-bac GPA and whether you should actually do a post-bac first place. So another one thing that's very important is like, again, I don't know if we were going to talk about this, but the score list is, from what I'm saying, is very, very important because there's certain schools that have a certain mission. I don't know if like people take that seriously, but like it dictates the type of applicants that they take. So if you have like, if you feel like, stat wise, you're doing okay, again, your story usually attracts a specific type of school. That's one thing I want to ask.
Nice.
And
I love that. Oh, I'm
I
so
did
sorry.
want to just,
I keep doing
since
this.
we were on, since we were on the topic of talking about programs, like I went to Eastern Virginia Medical School, and the grad program that I did is called, this formal name is called like the Med Masters, and so they are kind of regarded as one of the better programs, particularly in the Virginia area, as far as like they do a really good job of getting a certain percentage of every class into their program. And then they post like, I think it's about, I want to say 30 to 40%. They, in a class of 150, they save about 30 to 40 seats specifically for people in that program. And then they have like a rate of about 85 to 90% of people get into medical school somewhere within 2 years of graduating. So you want to look those things up. And that was my my tidbit that I wanted to add in. So.
All good. Perfect. I see the questions in the chat, but I think what we're talking about in terms of apps is a good segue for this next question, and then we will get to those. But what is kind of like the application process for your prospective programs or that you applied to? Like, what is it like? So what was the application process like?
For me personally, mine actually, I think they've changed it, but it was relatively simple. All I really needed to do was, I believed you needed a letter of recommendation, which I was able to get through work. And for my program specifically, because it was really focused on getting people into medical school as opposed to pre-health overall, which is how some of the other master's programs are, you needed an MCAT to apply. So that was, I would say, the biggest stipulation with my program is just needing to already have that MCAT to sort of show serious dedication of really wanting to go to medical school. But besides that, mine was like pretty standard. Honestly, I felt like filling out a lot of like secondaries were way worse than applying to my master's program. But yeah, my experience was not super rigorous. Just I feel like that huge barrier was needing to have that MCAT score before applying.
And mine actually felt kind of like a miniature medical school application cycle. It was a lot quicker, and we didn't have secondaries and all that, but we did have to have a letter of rec. I don't remember if we had to have an MCAT score or not, but they did expect like full transcripts and everything like that. And then we did do an in-person interview day where you interviewed with 2 different faculty members, and they were asking about like extracurriculars and research and things like that. And then we had a student tour, and it felt just like med school interviews were for my program.
Mine was similar to Luigi. It was pretty straightforward. The focus was like you needed an MCAT. I think they had a certain cutoff. I think it was like it's like 500 or so. And then after that is you need like one letter, and the application overall was pretty simple. It's mostly about just trying to get you in there to try to help you get into medical school.
I guess just again, mine again, very odd. But again, if you feel like you want to do like a kind of a non-traditional postbacc, again, at NIH where I was, it was actually a pretty simple application, but kind of rigorous selection process where you actually submit 2 letters of recommendation, and yeah, 2 letters of recommendation, college transcript, and yeah, that's pretty much it. And then you just reach out to PIs and see if they like you, then they pick you.
Yeah, same here. Pretty much very similar, like simple standard application. And the only thing I would say that was different about mine is they accepted either MCAT and or GRE. I don't know if it's still similar, but I took the GRE and then I ended up applying. One other big thing that if it's possible, if there's a specific program that's in your radar that you like, I actually just went to one of their open houses, their presentations, and I spoke to one of the advisors about the master's program, and that gave me a lot of insight. And I went to drop off some paperwork, and I got to speak to one of the advisors. I think that really helped, just getting a name to a face and increase my chances, because it was one of the more competitive ones in the state to get into. So I definitely had to make like, I definitely felt like that kind of helped, considering I had very average stats.
Perfect. I think this next question, we'll actually take the one from the chat. So there was a question, or were any of your programs like, did you guys have these brought up on interviews at all, or did programs ask you any about your postbacc or your master's program? And if so, maybe like kind of what aspects did they ask you about?
For me, it was actually like the focal point of what we talked about, like outside of my experiences. I'm not sure if it was just because I was applying after I'd been out of undergrad for a long time, or it was just because of the nature of the program, but I really thought that I used my master's program and my application to sort of show that I was academically prepared for medical school. So I also think because I framed my master's program that way, that's sort of why it was really brought up. But things I really emphasized in my master's program was, I was told this by my advisor, which was great advice, is to really emphasize the qualities that you need as a good medical student. So things that sort of fall under that category is being a hard worker, being resilient, being adaptable to changing up methods when things aren't really working for you. And then also, just really being able to work hard, and that resiliency is key. You need that as a medical student, no matter where you go. So I think I sort of used my master's program to show that I was able to get those qualities and prove them in an academic setting to myself and to the people that were reading my application as well. So I think just because of the way that I framed my program, that's why it was brought up a lot. I will also say, which really ties back to what we were talking about with really doing your research on the program, is that I knew that my program was like really, really well known, not only to schools in the area, but also schools like on the coasts as well. So so people actually name dropped the program director during my interviews, which was like crazy to me that they knew who she was. So I feel like that's another reason why as well. And the reason why that really ties back into it is because a lot of the interviews I went on was they had mentioned like, oh, we have students from that master's program and we love them. So I feel like that was like really huge for me, and was another reason why it was sort of brought up as the centerpiece while I was interviewing.
Yeah, I want to second that. I got my program was name dropped multiple times in my interviews, and for the most part, it was all good stuff. Maybe had one interview where I felt like they were just playing bad cop, and they just took like one of the B's that I got in the program and said, "Oh, you got to be on this. You want to explain it?" And it was my first semester. It was from my first semester in the master's program, so I was just said, there was still like a little bit of a learning curve. I owned up to it, and I just said, I expressed that I did improve in the following semester. I think one big important fact is that some people are going into these with some things to work on academically, but the stakes are also very high to do well because it's somewhat like a last chance. So there's that like kind of push pull of I need to do really well, and also I'm just trying to improve myself. So if you don't start off too hot, I wouldn't. It's not the end of the world, but definitely take it as serious as possible because that year can really change your life and your application immensely. So I think it's very important to just pace yourself and be prepared and take it as serious as possible. Yeah.
For me, it wasn't really brought up all that much. It was maybe kind of roundabout way brought up in like an interview, but I think more so what the situation was that you could see, like I did okay in undergrad, but I think there was a stark difference in my grad program. So I think there was a clear picture coupled with the story that I told of a growth that you could see. So I don't think that led to them specifically saying like, oh, whatever about specific program, but I think it allowed me to have that story of seeing like, okay, this is where he was several years ago. He probably wouldn't have been ready, but he's definitely ready now. So.
Nice. All good answers. This next one kind of ties into, I saw Hunter's question in the chat is actually a question we have. So what were your programs actually like? So what were they like for you guys individually? You guys all had different experiences. So maybe tell us a little bit about what it was like at your specific program.
I guess so for us, our program was very much so, it is a program that's kind of like designed to help you get in. So how it worked is we were taking classes, or the majority of our classes, with the first year medical students. There were a few other courses that we took that weren't the same. But the design of it is more or less for them to assess your ability to handle medical school. So it was definitely, it could be difficult at times because we're in a mostly pass fail culture in medical school. Most schools are pass fail, but for us, we needed grades. So it's, interesting having classmates who they're like, oh yeah, I just need a pass. Meanwhile, if you're in the grad program, it's like, no, I'm trying to get an A on everything. So it wasn't too bad. I mean, it creates, or at least in your mind, you can create a sense of like needing to be the most competitive person, but overall, it wasn't too bad. It's a lot of work. You're definitely, because again, trying to make sure you're getting A's and adjusting early on, because medical school it's a lot. The whole drinking from a fire hose is a very true statement. So making that adjustment, it takes a lot early on.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, again, from a different perspective, my program also like kind of like prepared us to be pretty good applicants when it came to the application cycle. We had like we actually at the NIH there's a branch called the Office of Intramural Training and Education that have like a team of like PhDs and sometimes doctors that help like the postbacc students be prepared for the interview process. Like we have like workshops on how to write like a personal statement, like a good personal statement. You have like interview mocks that we have through that team, and also the different institutes at the NIH also have like someone that can work with you for your application. For me, like I was in NIAID, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, and I had like a great mentor that honestly I feel like my personal statement would not have been the way it was without her input. So those are some of the advantages that you also have that this postbacc program at the NIH can give you apart aside from the connection. Also, are we allowed to give the names of like specific programs? I'm not sure if that's allowed, like all the postbacc programs.
Yes.
Okay.
Name drop.
Sounds good. So my school specifically has Brown actually has a very good master's gateway program into the medical school. It's called a Brown Gateways program. They actually take classes with us as first years. And I want to also like emphasize that Brown actually is very gateway friendly, very master's students friendly. So masters and postbac students, because I think in our class last year we had like about a total of about 10 to 11 um, masters and I think postbac students from Goucher and also from the Gateway program. So we are very Gateway, very masters and postbac friendly.
My program also was very like, this is the medical school association was also like very master's friendly. So I'll start off by saying I really like loved my master's program. I would do it again if someone gave me like $50,000 again. So I would definitely do it. I definitely recommend it. The way that the program was structured was that it was sort of unique. So this was at Loyola, and it actually wasn't the Stritch master's program, it was the Loyola University master's program. So this one's a little bit unique in that it's not actually done on the medical school campus, which I thought was like really weird and a red flag, but that actually ended up being a fantastic experience. So this one's completely on the undergrad campus. And one of the reasons why I sort of did like that is because we didn't sort of have that, not competition, but just sort of sense of being with the medical students, which I know some people do view as a positive. I sort of liked that we were our own community, and I thought it was really collaborative, which I also really appreciated. So even though we weren't taking medical school courses, we got the foundational anatomy, physiology, the biochem, the immunology. Something that my program did really well as well was they sort of made us into future physician scientists in terms of being able to analyze data and analyze research. I thought was a huge benefit for the program, and actually ended up giving me skills so that when I was sort of shopping around for research as an M1 and an M2, I sort of had the skills that the PIs were looking for. So I was able to sort of interpret that data so that they didn't need to hire a statistician, and I knew how to sort of navigate the IRB and whatnot. So that's something that was foundationally learned in my master's program that I feel like not a lot of other programs do, which I think is pretty interesting. The other thing I think my program did really strongly was that advising, like I talked about. So you had 2 academic advisors, constant prep on how to interview well. The advisors were able to look at all of your activities, which I also really appreciated, and giving you feedback on how to apply to medical school to put your sort of best face forward. Another thing that I really liked is that Chicago, which is where the program is a huge medical city. So a lot of students from previous years were able to offer up their gap year jobs to students in the program as well, which led to letters of recommendation, research down the line. So one of my friends is actually doing research with the doctor that she worked with in her gap year from the master's program. So I feel like it was a really good network and community. And I also feel like in terms of our linkage was pretty good as well. So anywhere from like 8 to 12 people per year from my master's program end up going to Stritch. But what I think is actually a pretty impressive statistic is that they offer around 20 to 30 positions to students in my master's programs, but those students, end up getting into schools that sort of serve their needs a little bit more. So it just shows that the program is pretty good in offering that advising and offering that support to help you get into multiple schools, which I think is also great.
Yeah, I don't need to repeat everything because Luigi pretty much just covered my program. So I went to the University of Nebraska Medical Center for my master's in medical anatomy, and we did the normal anatomy, physiology. We had a journal club where we went over a lot of research and analyzing different articles and things. Part of our curriculum was some shadowing experiences, so we were able to add those to our application as well. And then we even had some volunteer teaching opportunities for some high school events that came in. So the program as a whole was great for building my application, and then as well as giving us connections within the medical school for letters of rec and things like that. Our classes themselves weren't with the med students because UNMC's med school curriculum is like an 18-month didactic curriculum instead of 24. So our classes were actually with the PA and PT students, but the tests were very similar to what we're seeing in med school now. And I will say it kind of depends on your background, but for me, my undergrad degree was in exercise science, so I already hit anatomy in that degree, and then getting a master's in anatomy, I just didn't have to study anatomy at all my first year of med school, and that made the rest of the classes a whole lot easier. So looking into the curriculum of what you're going to be seeing can be helpful as well. My class only had 14 students, and the only students that aren't in med school from that class decided that medicine isn't for them. So as far as the program putting out good students and getting you into medical school, it's fantastic. And then I guess the only other thing, Frank mentioned earlier, knowing your school list. So you want to be researching these programs that you're looking at applying during these gap years and things, but you definitely want to have a longer mindset and look at what your goal schools are down the road when choosing these programs. I had the goal of going to UNMC. I didn't get in because my MCAT was too low, but a lot of people from my class are now in that class at UNMC and doing very well. For the school that I'm at now, DMU, they have a Master's of Anatomy program that's a lot smaller. I want to say they have 5 to 7 students per year. It's a 2-year program, and during your second year, you end up TAing anatomy for the first year med students. And now every TA that I had as a first year is a first year med student this year. So if you want to go to DMU, that's a great program as well.
Perfect.
I was just say, I'll try to be brief. Everybody kind of covered similarities with my program. I went to the University of South Florida for my master's. They kind of wanted to emulate the first year of medical school, but it was obviously a little bit more diluted compared to the actual medical school classes. It was ran by all the medical school professors. They had excellent resources. While you're there, definitely take advantage of all the advisors and the professors. To this day, I still speak to some of my professors from that program. They're excellent resources. They have a lot of connections, and they can guide you in the right way. My program was a little bit bigger. It was probably about 80 students as far as the class size. And majority did do well, and same thing. If they didn't get in, there was more so because they didn't want to pursue medicine further. And yeah, and I think a big thing about like timeline wise for those who apply to medical school and then do the master's as they're in the application process, you have a lot of incentive to do well in the first semester, because if you show that you did really well in the first semester and you upgrade programs, a lot of people from my program, they got a lot of interviews after winter break just because they got a 4.0 in the first semester, and a lot of them ended up securing a seat for that same cycle. So definitely the rewards are worth it. It's definitely rigorous. It was a little more difficult than undergrad, took a little bit more, diligence and focus, but it was definitely worth it, especially because everything you learn will pay it forward. Everything you learn will make your life easier in the long run. It's more applicable. So yep.
Perfect. Those are all good responses. We have another question here. So how do you guys feel like these programs particularly improved your specific app? So I think you guys kind of like touched on it, kind of listening in, but what did you guys think maybe attributed to the success after the program?
So that's CJ, you're at NIH, right?
Sorry, one more time.
Are you at the NIH right now?
Yeah, so I'm in a program right now. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So I'm in Wake Forest, their biomedical science program. Michael's actually my classmate. So
I see. So yeah, so I cannot emphasize this more. And again, if you're on this call and again, if you feel like you need to improve your grade, yeah, go to a conventional Postbacc program and a master's program if necessary. But again, if you don't have to, and like a 3.4, I think CJ mentioned that earlier, 3.4 is not a bad GPA. If your science GPA is a 3.4, that is fine. We actually had the whole team at the NIH was telling us that based on insights that they have, if you can hit 3.45 science GPA, you're competitive enough. And I would say seeing where all of like the people in my postbac year at the NIH ended up, pretty much top 10 programs, you can tell that there's something there, and they definitely, because most of these schools, that's why, like I was saying, know where you want to go, like know your application and know what school fits you better. Because I feel like if you're at NIH, you're probably like more research heavy type of thing, and that's what those schools want. And again, just from where we all ended up, just proves that okay, yeah, these schools value research. And even during the interview, all of the schools, the top programs that I interviewed at, mentioned that experience. I actually had the funny thing is, like here at Brown, one of my first interviewer asked me about my PI, which happened to be Dr. Fauci, for the short story. He was like, "Oh, I used to play tennis with him. Like, it's been a long time, just stuff like that." And again, even at the other schools, the same thing, like always asking me about my research. So like even the people that they picked to interview me were very research heavy, like in the field of immunology and infectious disease, compared to like if you came from a music background, you probably have somebody else that interview you. So again, where you go for your master's program, as many of you mentioned, and what you did, be prepared to talk about it. I was really cooked in terms of like, okay, my research, like I literally had at Brown, like one of the infectious disease doctors asked me about how my research can actually help to can actually serve in future pandemics in the future. And to be honest with you, I had no idea. I just came out with a response like that. It sounded nice, and I guess that convinced him. So, yeah.
I think to go off of that, I like master's programs in and of itself, I think inherently do a good job showing programs that you're serious about applying to medical school. I think, at least at my school and from my experiences on the interview trail, a lot of what they're asking you is to really get a sense of, does this kid sitting in front of me understand what their life is going to be like as a medical student, and what kind of sacrifice that's going to entail for them? Like, are they ready to start a program like medical school? Because I mean, as everybody who's in medical school here knows, it's extremely difficult, and it's like hard to sort of explain unless you're really in it. So I think master's programs inherently prove to AdComs that you are very serious about wanting to apply to medical school to become a physician specifically. So inherently there's that. I do go back and forth because I don't think you should have to spend $100,000 to sort of prove that to schools, but unfortunately that's just sort of like the climate of it. Also as well, I think it shows master's programs, if you do well in the program, which is like how we've mentioned before, why it's super important to take it seriously. It shows that you have the potential and the capability to be in a rigorous program and adapt to the challenges of that academic program, which is something that you're going to be needing to do on a weekly basis in medical school. So I just feel like that was one of the ways that my master's program, throughout my application and throughout my interviews, sort of really helped to prove to schools that I was interviewing with that I was not only ready from a maturity standpoint, and obviously your activities sort of help with that as well, but also from an academic standpoint, like I was sort of ready to undertake the sort of huge burden of a medical school preclinical education. So I feel like master's programs are inexpensive, but a very good way to show medical schools that you're ready for the challenge.
Yeah, I agree with everything Luigi just said, and just seconding that idea that is really a lot of times when you're talking about academic masters, post-bac programs, it's really wanting to show that these schools that it's like you have what it takes from an academic standpoint, because you can probably have a bunch of different experiences that look really good, but if they're not sure that you can handle what's going on in medical school, it makes it tough. So.
I love it. This next question is actually going to come from the chat and kind of ties into a submitted question too. So if a master's program really isn't geared towards medical school, how do you find the time to study for the MCAT? And there was also like another question just about time management in general. So I think we can kind of talk about like, managing that during your programs. Like, how did you guys figure out how to do it? Like, there is a lot, right? Like if you're going to do this master's program and you still want to apply to medical school, like you still have to take the MCAT. So how did you guys manage to get all this done?
Do not take the MCAT unless you are ready. That is like one of my biggest pieces of advice for applying to medical school. I want to punch myself in the face because I did not listen to that advice. I also was not able to take advantage of my linkage program because of my MCAT score, and it's something that I do really regret. So I would say the only timeline that you really need to listen to and abide by when you're applying to medical school is your timeline. So if you need to take a few extra months, that will push you into the next application cycle because you feel like those few months will really help you get a competitive score. In my opinion, I think it's really worth it to wait that extra time and only take the MCAT when you're prepared. It's way better to wait an extra year to apply than to have gone through an unsuccessful application cycle and reapply again. To answer the question directly, my master's program, I'm curious to hear if everybody else's was like this, but they actually sort of made the expectation for us that we would not be taking the MCAT during our actual master's program. And instead, it was sort of the natural progression that we all took it in the summer after our master's program, meaning that we would apply for medical school that summer after already completing our master's program. So because of this, our master's program ended a little bit earlier in I think it was late April or early May, I can't remember. So it did give us a few weeks of wiggle room to prepare and take the MCAT. I wasn't able to do that because I was working, but a lot of my classmates did, and it worked really well for them, especially because a lot of these master's programs, if they are set up that way, they know that a lot of students are going to be retaking the MCAT. So my program sort of stacked the MCAT relevant courses towards the ending of the master's program. So that way it was sort of like fresh in our minds. And if we wanted to take the MCAT, all of that information was really recent for us. So we didn't have to necessarily prepare as rigorously as we did the first time, for example, before we applied.
I don't know what the course load of everyone else's programs was like, but mine definitely isn't and wasn't the same course load that I have in medical school. So it was manageable to balance other things with a master's program, at least in my experience. I had a part-time job as a medical scribe while I was in my master's program, and then I was studying for the MCAT as well. And I love the analogy of, med school is like drinking out of a fire hose, but no one, I heard that a million times before I got to medical school, but I didn't truly understand what it meant until I was there. You just can't really fathom what it's actually like. And to start my master's program, they gave us this pancake analogy where if someone were to give you a plate of pancakes every morning with 5 pancakes, it's doable. You can eat that amount of pancakes, but if you skip those pancakes one day, the next day you have 10. And that's just not doable for most. I mean, I can eat 10 pancakes, but they build up very quickly, and that's what med school is like. In the master's program, it's I would say my program had about half of the amount of classwork that we had to do, so I was able to balance other things, and it really just is about practicing discipline and managing your time wisely, because there was time for me to study outside of class, but like Luigi said, if your program doesn't give you time and expects that you're not dedicating time to that, just push your timeline back a little bit. I mean, everyone is going to be very different as far as how much dedicated time they need to study for the MCAT. Some people could finish school, early May and take the test mid-June and be done and good for that application cycle. And other people might need a couple more months. So it's going to be a very individual basis as well as program dependent.
I think this is going to be the last thing I say tonight, so I have to hop off. But yeah, I've been working in the lab full time, and studying for the MCAT was definitely not fun. And again, especially if you're working with a postdoc that's not very flexible, then it's not gonna work for you. So in that sense, practice question, I think that's a word that JR likes to use. Practice questions. So what I'll do is I finish lab maybe at 6 p.m. and then I'll just go home, try to knock off those practice questions, maybe 2 to 3 hours every day. That's how I did my studying. Some days I wouldn't do them because again I was just end up just being late in the lab. But that's how I did my reviews, did practice questions because I didn't really have time to do content review. So if you're in my situation and you feel like you have a full-time job and just doing lots of practice questions and taking full-length tests on weekend could be a good strategy, and ended up working well for me. Right. It's nice to see you guys.
The good news is after your master's or during your master's, as you progress more and more, it's going to be easier to study MCAT material as well, just because, especially the biochem section. But my score went up significantly after I did my master's, and I didn't really have to study too much other than the practice questions and evaluating how the test makers want the questions answered. So it was definitely much easier, and my score shot up after my master's program. Another thing I think that's important is there'll be like a portion of content studying, and then there'll be a portion of dedicated practice. Specifically, I would say the AMC materials. So there's specific windows where you'll have time to study or to do just kind of solely focus on the MCAT practice questions. So for me, that was winter break. I took my MCAT in January. I don't know if I would strongly encourage it. I was just prepared content wise, and then I spent my winter break and a couple of weeks of January just honing in on the AMC materials, and that was sufficient for me. So it's kind of still, I agree with everybody. It's going to depend on where you are and how much you need to study. But if you have at least a good block of time to at least get the practice in, understand what the test makers want, how they kind of phrase their questions, I think you'll be all right.
Can I just add, so I was fortunate in my program kind of had a period built in, and then it ran along with COVID. So there was, the whole world had kind of stopped. So what else to do but study? But what I would say, something that I talked about with some of my friends is maybe like, I think this is more applicable like in undergrad, but I feel like depending on your program, you could apply it to, is if you can get a hold of like a Kaplan book or something like that, try to match that up to your classes, like going through the book. And if you're taking biochem, looking through the biochem in the Kaplan book that applies, and try to kind of focus on those things while you're in those classes. And then, as with what everyone else said, look at yourself. Like, don't try to force yourself to try to take the test the year before, because you need to get in next year, because if you don't do well, you're going to end up having to reapply anyway. So it's better to just take your time and make sure that you're able to take it at your pace when you feel that you're ready.
Something that Chris said just also reminded me, if you do have difficulty like getting those resources, because they're honestly like super expensive, if you're like in a city that has a lot of universities, try to see if you can join their like free and for sale Facebook page. I know that like for my university, people are like constantly selling MCAT books for like really, really cheap. So that's one way that you might be able to get something for free that otherwise might be really expensive.
Nice. This was all really good feedback. I think we'll just touch on one more because we didn't really talk about it at all. And I just want to make sure, the question gets addressed. But how'd you guys deal with maybe like the finances? So I know we talk about these programs are expensive, like how did you navigate that for a year or 2 years or however long your program was?
So for any graduate program, you qualify for the same loans that we qualify for medical school. So I funded my entire master's program, well, both master's degrees that I have, with Grad Plus loans from the government. So I doubled my undergrad debt getting a master's degree, and I just lived off of what they gave me and then the little bit of income that I had from my part-time job.
Much kind of the same as Hunter, getting the loans and the funds, just stacking up loans, hey, tends to happen. And then whether it's like, I know like through my school, there's different tutoring opportunities, local tutoring opportunities. And then if you have any ability to get a part-time job, and make sure that like, don't, if you need to take out loans and just focus on using loan money, do that rather than saying, and everybody's situation is different, right? But don't force yourself to work if you can make it work with just the loans at the expense of school, basically is what I was getting at. But of course, if you need to work, everybody's situation is different. You just got to work on balancing things as best as you can.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I also took out loans. So my current like FAFSA homepage is like really scary in terms of my total loans. But something I will also mention too is that I think we've heard like some good variety of between like like programs that sort of are more rigorous in terms of like the expectations versus like Hunter mentioned that he was able to work during it. I would say if working during your master's program is something that you want to do just for any source of income, whether that's like getting groceries or actually like significantly contributing to your tuition, try to speak to students beforehand as you're shopping around. And the reason why I say that is because my program, for example, our director during our orientation was like, do not have a job during this program. It is, you're not going to have time to. If you do have a job, students in the past have like had to sacrifice their grades, which sort of negates the whole purpose you're here, as opposed to other programs that sort of understand that and do give a little bit more cushion and wiggle room for students to have jobs. So definitely do your research if that's something that you prioritize, if you're not wanting to take out as many loans.
Yeah, I'll add that my program director had the same message that we couldn't have a job during the first semester, but as long as you felt that you could manage it after that, then you could go ahead and get one. And the job that I had was a remote scribe position that I just did like as I had time. So it wasn't even like a committed thing. So.
Perfect. Yeah, it looked like maybe JR's Wi-Fi went out, so it's all good. But I want to thank the panelists. They are all great. They had a lot of good feedback here. I think we pretty much addressed everything. But if there are any other questions or things you guys want to throw in there that we didn't talk about, like feel free. But yeah, I'll give it a second if anyone has any questions.
And if anyone in here has like very specific or individual questions, or anyone that's watching the recording afterwards, feel free to reach out through Slack, because I'm more than happy to answer questions about my programs or just master's programs in general.
Yeah, I second that, especially as someone who like might have graduated a while ago from undergrad. I went through that experience myself. So if you have any questions on that as well, I would be more than happy to help you navigate that.
Yeah, don't hesitate to reach out. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, don't hesitate to reach out either to me as well.
Sweet.